What's up guys, and in today's video I'm going to be going through building trust through transparency and how this has helped me innovate and iterate the projects that we are working on currently and just be better in what it is that we're actively building. And the reason why I'm doing this is to basically show our build raw and real, basically showing you the good, the bad, the ugly, and what it is that we're building so that we can document it in order to build better feedback loops and just constantly push the needle of what we think is possible today. And also just to solve really messy, complicated problems, really challenging problems within businesses and organizations, and just solve those problems and relieve business owners from chaos, and also just to call in visionaries, basically people that understand what our mission is, what it is that we're doing, and also just to build a network of cool people doing cool things. And how I'm actively building trust through transparency is in 5 simple steps, of which I can be broken down into be real always. And why this matters is people don't trust polished stuff, they trust real. Sharing my raw journey pulls planners and founders in, which is one of the most important things for me at this current present moment in time, because one of the things that I want to actively focus on is just connecting with people that understand what it is that we're building, because they've also been there, they've also walked the trenches. And this is something that I genuinely believe in, that saying, hey, you've been through this and you totally understand, and you're relatable in terms of the steps and things that I will face into the future and things that people above me have faced, and that ultimately just builds that trust and bond. And why this being real is if you're authentic in the stage that you're at and show that you're actively building, similar to how I'm doing this, of saying, hey, daily videos like this, I'm not hiding the late nights, the hustle to build Killer Chaos OS, and why it is that we're building this. And the ultimate goal for this is to kill chaos within businesses so that we can ultimately create value for them. And the reason why we're actively doing this is because I found a reason to say, hey, we genuinely need to solve this problem. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to create the amount of value that we want to into the future. And also just by creating X posts, for example, saying, hey, just finished this dashboard crash, and here's what I learned, the truth, the good, the bad, the ugly, leaving nothing out, saying, hey, this is what we built, this is where I failed, this is where I'm going to improve the next time. Saying, hey, for example, we built a project and we said, hey, we didn't focus on the core main things, or we lost track of that. And the reason why we lost track of that is because we had too many things going on. And asking the questions of, hey, how can we now iterate on the next project that we can constantly just push the needle of what is for or what is possible, and just keep iterating to make better and better systems. And the lesson that I've learned from this is authenticity beats perfection every single time, no matter how authentic you are, because people connect with that. If you're able to show who you truly are, people are going to connect with you simply because they are related to what it is that you're building. Because if you are someone else, or you want to portray as someone else and not who you truly are, people are going to pick that up very quick, and they're not going to ultimately just want to connect with you and build relationships with you. And this is something that I found along my journey by just simply being myself, and the people that I pull in ultimately align with what it is that we're actively building and that I also actively want to build. And the grounding question I like to ask here is, what's one part of my process I can share to connect deeper with my audience? For example, these daily videos, just asking those simple questions of what process or what thought framework can I share that is relatable, in order to say, hey, we're going to use this and people are going to get what it is that we're building, because they've been there, they've been through the trenches of what it is that we're building, and just building through transparency and saying, hey, this is what we're building, and we are not that where we want to be for sure, but we're on track to actively solving that, and we're just constantly just pushing the needle of what is for or what is possible. And number 2, which is let clients see inside. For example, why this matters is planners don't just build systems, they buy trust, which ultimately means showing how I build earns confidence. Showing the processes, the wins, the losses, ultimately just bridges that gap in trust, ultimately showing, hey, this is how we build, this is the process, the same process that you're ultimately just gonna get the more we just build with you into the future. And how I'm actively doing this is demo clips saying, hey, here's a dashboard I built to sync vendors, what are your thoughts? send me a DM and then let me know what you think. So basically solving their problems and letting them see inside of how our mental models are working and building that feedback loop, of course, which is post-call polls on tally.so or Airtable to ask, hey, what's missing, and then basically just tweak depending on their input. I've spoken a lot about this in terms of feedback loops, and feedback loops are one of the most important things because you're not going to be able to push the needle, or at least I found that pushing the needle requires a lot of input, a lot of feedback, and it needs to be structured in a sense that, hey, we need to have a systemized process in terms of how we handle feedback rather than just taking feedback and just throwing it in a Google Docs and then what are you going to do with it? Basically saying, hey, we have this feedback and we're going to tally the feedback and we're going to find correlations within what we have in terms of different categories. For example, user UI, what is going on with the workflow or the process that we have in terms of just the overall build. How can we constantly just push the needle forward and just constantly keep innovating? And the lesson that I've learned from this is transparency in delivery builds loyalty even before the sale. What this ultimately means is if you're able to be transparent and saying, hey, we actively solve these problems, even though we've faced these problems, moving on into the next project, we're not likely going to face those problems, or we're going to face them, but we're going to know how to handle them. And you're not going to have to worry about that because we've dealt that, and there's living proof of that we have actively dealt with these problems, and we can also solve the next problems. And the grounding question that I like to ask is, how can I let my clients see more of my process to earn their trust in order to say, hey, if you know what we do and the processes that we follow, obviously it builds an expectation to say, hey, you will get the same level of process, which ultimately just leads me to say, hey, how can we constantly push the needle in order to create the best user experience or the best experience in terms of our onboarding, our sales process, or whichever process we're looking at in terms of building out the solutions that we are actively building out, and saying, hey, if we can showcase that, people that see that will ultimately trust what it is that we're building, and it will ultimately build the loyalty before the sale. And also just owning your own learnings, basically saying, hey, why this matters is pretending like you're flawless kills trust. Owning what you're learning makes you relatable and real. For example, what it is that we're learning over here, like, hey, I'm not the best in terms of speaking, but I'm actively using this as a platform in order to become better and also just to present better by constantly iterating small tweaks into what it is that I'm actively pushing in these videos. For example, also on X, what I'm doing is my pitch sucked and here's how I fixed it, because planners respect honesty, and not just planners but business owners in general. Because if you say, hey, this is what didn't work and we're actively working to solve that, that trust gap is ultimately built through that. And ultimately also with my team basically showing that, hey, I'm learning to coach you better in order to say, hey, let's nail these emails and build the trust within the team, or just nail any different types of processes, whether it's the process of what it is that we're building in terms of development or design, to say, hey, these processes that we had in place aren't as good as I thought in the time that we built them out. Let's scrap them or let's innovate on them and say, hey, this actually works based on this feedback that we've gotten, and also the data points as well, which is super important because ultimately admitting gaps shows that you're growing and not faking, because no one's perfect, and ultimately just showing that, hey, I'm perfect ultimately creates the scenario of saying, hey, so if he's perfect, where are the flaws? And then we start working together and then you say, hey, but there's XYZ that's going on. That's why owning your learnings and owning my learnings per se has been the number one thing that has helped me get there, and also just constantly push the needle of my own thoughts and mental models of asking the questions of how can I constantly just become better and show this through authenticity, and ask the grounding question of what's one mistake I can own to build stronger connections. Because when you own your mistakes, you ultimately build that connection and trust as well, because you are portrayed to be human. Everyone makes mistakes, everyone messes up, but if you're constantly having things perfect, what does it show? Does it show that you are the person that is perfect and never gets things wrong? And then when we start working together, oh, everything goes wrong, and how do you deal with that? Say, for example, if things go wrong, also from the perspective of the people that are watching or that you're building the connection with, of saying, hey, things go wrong, they matter. What matters more in terms of that ultimately becomes how you problem solve. And if they see your process in terms of how you problem solve, I ultimately believe that this will ultimately just build that trust to say, hey, if he faces problems and he's messed up, how does he take accountability for the missions or for the mistakes that he has made, and ultimately just improve on that? And if he's able to do that for his own thing, surely he can do it for mine, and why not? Which ultimately builds that same deeper level of connection. And also, which also leads to the fourth point, which is proving it fast. And why this matters is transparency is empty without results. Small wins show clients you're legit. And the number one thing that you can do here, or that I've at least implemented, is saying, hey, no matter how small a win is, I'm going to showcase it, because it ultimately shows people that I can do what it is that we need to do. Of which, in the beginning, when you're just starting out and you don't have any case studies and you don't have anything to show for it, even if you just do something for free and you say, hey, I did this for free, this is what we can showcase, and you have that as a demo, it ultimately builds that trust in order to say, hey, you're legit, you know what you're doing, and you're actively building towards that, and that builds a deeper level of connection and trust as well. And also, how I'm actively doing this is quick fixes. For example, say, hey, built a vendor list in Airtable for Planner in a day, shared it the same day, so that we can show that, hey, we have an MVP that we built, and this is how we built it, and this is the thought process that went to building it, and just documenting that build live and raw, and showing, hey, this is what we did, and we did it the same day. And YouTube, also doing on YouTube, this automation saved hours, and here's how. It's proof, not promises, because the number one thing that you can show is proof to say, hey, we've done this before. We're not just talking from wherever we're talking from, but we're at least showing you that, hey, we've done this, and here's the proof of what it is that we're actively building, and just documenting and sharing that a lot more in terms of how we're thinking, how we're actively showing up each and every single day. And the lesson that I've learned here is early wins turn trust into action, of which just being proactive and just taking those wins and turning it into action, which ultimately leads to you creating momentum for yourself and what it is that you're actively building. And what you could do for this is, hey, solve a small problem for a prospect today. Quick tip, share it with them. No matter how small you think it is still value at the end of the day. And the grounding question I like to ask here then is, what's one quick win I can deliver in order to prove my value? This could be sharing a PDF document that we had for an existing client, just to show that, hey, we know what we're talking about and we have value to provide, and ultimately we're going to show you a taste of what it is that we have to provide. And ultimately, if that is aligned with what it is that you would want to see, we can work together on that and just build off of that. And now, which then leads to number 5, which is ultimately build the empire, which is one that ties everything together. And why this matters is, trust isn't just for today, it's the foundation for the ultimate vision. Trusted systems scale industries. For example, hey, you starting in one industry to say, hey, we're building the case portfolio, to say we've built it in this specific industry and we can build it in multiple different ones. It's just then becomes a point of saying, hey, we've learned this one skill that is transferable in different avenues, and we can use it to scale horizontally or vertically. Just depends on how we definitely implement it in terms of building future scale. And how I'm actively doing this is starting with planners, saying, hey, transparent builds lead to bigger deals, which ultimately leads us to saying, hey, each and every small win ultimately leads us to our grand vision, the vision that we want to have as a company and as a person myself as well. And how I'm actively doing this as well is trust that when I'm building what I'm building now sets the stage for more. Just always having that thought process of saying, hey, what we're building for today is ultimately just going to lead to the next thing that we're going to build. So let's collect as much data and feedback as much as possible in order to make sure that when we do get to the stage that we're going to be building more complex and higher level things, that we're going to understand and we're going to pull in all the data from now in order to get there and say, hey, we learned all of this, we failed all of this, and this is what we've learned, and this is what we're actively implementing into the next phase of what it is that we're building. And the lesson that I've learned here is trust ultimately compounds. Build it now and scale it later. So saying, hey, we've built all this trust with different people, and over time that trust compounds because we've done good work. We're ultimately saying, hey, we want to work with different people and we want to do right by them each and every single day. Ultimately, this compounds in the sense that more things come to fruition in the future, saying, hey, new partnerships or new business ventures can form simply because people trust you more, and that trust that you laid in the beginning ultimately compounds. And this is now where you start scaling it later for the future, but just having that open mind or that perspective of how can I constantly just provide as much value as possible, and ultimately that value will compound over time. And the grounding question that I like to ask here to tie everything up together is, how can I build today to feel my biggest vision for myself and for the team? What it is that we're building today that ultimately fuels the vision. It can be anything small, mundane, to say, hey, we want to learn system design because ultimately we're going to be designing systems, for example, for lunar transfer orbits to space. That could be something that we could say like, hey, we want to start small and we just want to keep pushing the needle of what is possible, because the grand vision is so difficult, but we're actively trying to push the needle in that sense to ultimately get there, which ultimately leads us to understanding what it is that we need to do. And we've also skill stacked in the sense that we've gotten so many skills from that, we've gotten so many skills that we can then transfer into the next venture that we do take. And this is just overall my premise for building trust through transparency, which ultimately shows what it is that we're building, and just actively using this to implement better mental models, better frameworks, and just ultimately to build the vision in the way that we want to build it in. Not only for me, but also for the team. And this is why this is such an important topic for me, especially because just building, showing the raw builds of how we are in terms of learning, how we're proving what it is that we're building, and also just ultimately building the empire is one of the most important things to me. And I know we've still got a lot to learn. This is just my take on it, but I know that into the future, this is going to be the springboard or the foundation for which it is that we're going to be building the future for. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to connect with me on X, on Instagram, and I'll see you guys in the next video.